Again, welcome everyone. I was thinking about the communication we have with others. Some of our jobs are primarily communication-based these days. Before I retired, I had to speak to other departments in my agency to coordinate our efforts. I had to contact vendors and help them to set up equipment and services according to our needs. And I had to give reports to our insurance company quarterly. Communication is very important to all of us, in business, in our personal lives, and in the church. I think many likely underestimate the importance of communication in all of our daily lives. Today we communicate with each other by postal service, email, text messages, online conferencing, by telephone, radio, television, social media, even streaming via the internet as we're doing right now. And maybe even face-to-face. That's becoming a lost art, I think. In the past, we had Morse code, smoke signals, even mirrors reflecting the sun. They were all used for communication. And of course, I think we all know that the Israelites used shofars and silver trumpets to communicate with people. Some forms of communication are faster and more efficient than others, but they all have the same general purpose: to communicate some type of information to others. And of course, some forms of communication are more effective than others. For example, when speaking face-to-face with someone, we can observe their facial expressions, their speed, the pitch of their voice, even their body language to help us better understand the meaning of what they're trying to convey. But when sending an email or a text, these important cues are often missing. And even when we speak on the telephone, we gain some information just from the sound of a person's voice. Do they sound happy or sad or maybe excited? But still, we lose any visual clues. I believe we can communicate most effectively when we can both hear a person's voice and see their body language, their facial expressions and gestures. These are, of course, lost when using text messages and emails, although we can sometimes use emoticons or emojis to express how we feel when we speak in text messages and in emails. But for accurate communication to take place, the technical quality of the communication must be good. For example, radio sometimes fades in and out. There are times when we might lose part of or even an entire radio communication due to factors such as obstacles and atmospheric conditions. Texts and emails can be delayed due to internet issues, and they can sometimes be problematic due to our smart devices trying to help us. Have you ever had that problem? Predictive text and autocorrect sometimes cause us to send a message that's not entirely accurate. Let me give you a real example of this that happened to me some time ago. Now, I received an email from one of our good brothers in the faith. He was talking about the Aaronic blessing. You probably know what that is, right? In Numbers 6, verse 22, Aaron, that's Moses' brother, and a Levitical priest, was told to bless the people of Israel by using this prayer. And that's what I believe this man intended to say in his email to me. He was talking about the Aaronic prayer. However, in the email, the word Aaronic was spelled E-R-O-T-I-C. E-R-O-T-I-C, erotic. Therefore, it read that this was an erotic blessing. I'm not making this up. Now, that's obviously a very different meaning than what was intended. At least I hope so. Most likely, automatic spell check errantly made this change that went unnoticed. So most of us might understand that what this man meant to say was rather humorous, if not rather embarrassing. A mistake like this appearing at the wrong place and the wrong time could have serious implications. While our smart devices try to help us, they sometimes make mistakes, and I'm sure we're all aware of that. If we're not careful, our emails and text messages might even become misunderstood. But what about our own voices? Can we communicate clearly and effectively using our voices and perhaps our body language as well? Well, that probably depends a little on the individual. Some of us are naturally very good at effective communication. Others often struggle with it. Personally, I've struggled with my speech most all my life. I often tend to speak way too fast and don't pronounce my words accurately. A good friend once told me, I often turn a 3-syllable word into a 1-syllable word when I speak. And he's right. I think I've told you before that my 5th grade teacher told me that I would never be able to explain anything to anyone. I was just too difficult to understand. She said my brain went ahead of my mouth and my mouth couldn't keep up. Now, whether that is true or not, I have struggled with my speech. Now, a speech club named Toastmasters was a great help to me, and I highly recommend them. Some churches sponsor a spokesman club, which is very similar. And they can help practically anyone at any level improve their speech no matter what they're speaking about. Now, so far, I've been talking about the technical aspects of communication, you might say. Obviously, if we fail to convey our message due to technical reasons, then our communication fails. We can all work on our speech and consider how we might more effectively communicate a message to someone. I mentioned Toastmasters and Spokesman's Club. They can help us. They can do that. But again, this is technical information that helps us get our message delivered. But far more important is the content of the message. That's the most important thing about communication, the content. So, besides what I've said so far, is there another source that might provide some good insight as to how we're to speak? Well, I think particularly about our content, I think we're in luck because our Bibles have much to say about how we're to communicate with others. So today, let's look at what the Bible has to say about how we are to speak. Let's begin today with James chapter 1 and verse 18. That's James chapter 1, verse 18. So in improving our communication with others, and especially in the church, I think this is a great place to start. If all of us could just remember to always follow the advice found here in James, we would do well. I know I am guilty, rather, of not always following this advice, but I'm trying to make a point to improve it. Again, James 1, verse 18 reads, "Of his own will begat he us with a word of truth, that we should be a kind of firstfruits of his creatures." Now, this word of truth goes out to those whom God calls. And this is certainly a great gift from God. And if we're called today, we're given truth and the opportunity to become God's first fruits. Verse 19. "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath." Or as the easy to read version says, "My dear brothers and sisters, always be more willing to listen than to speak. Keep control of your anger." So to be a good speaker, to be an effective communicator, we first need to become a good listener. Now, concerning us being swift to listen, I'd like to quote from an article located at Forbes.com. The title of the article is, "To Communicate Well, Listen First." Quote, "Before we speak, we need to listen. And when we do speak, we need to make sure that our audience is listening to us. As with nearly every aspect of persuasive communication, there are a few key ways to improve your own listening and encourage it in your audience. First, why is listening so important as an initial step in communication? Because it helps you understand your audience and thus tailor your message to their needs and concerns. By listening well, in other words, through active listening, we discover the best way to deliver the message we need our audience to hear." End quote. How many of us have heard someone speaking? Perhaps it was one of our brothers or sisters, and they might be explaining maybe why they believe what they believe. But before they could finish, someone else cuts them off so they can tell them the real truth about the matter, right? Or at least their version of what's true. How many of us have experienced this? I thought so. Yeah, and the person cutting the speaker off was certainly not being swift to listen. They were swift to speak. But our Bibles and even the secular worlds that we just saw tells us we should be good listeners and we should be slow to speak. For one thing, it's just not polite to interrupt someone who's speaking. Also, if we're trying to help the original speaker, we need to understand exactly what they're saying. We should give them time to fully explain their understanding of their position. Otherwise, we might end up addressing the wrong issue or not address things in a way that they and others can understand. As the article said, listening helps you understand your audience and thus tailor your message to their needs and concerns. So why are so many of us, and that probably includes me too, why are so many of us so eager to interrupt others and then speak what we know or what we think we know? Well, I suspect that, unfortunately, this may be partially due to pride. Pride in ourselves that we have the answer and that others' ideas or beliefs, well, they're really unimportant. Why listen to others when we just know they're going to be wrong even before we hear them out? Are we that sure that we have everything right, that we always know more than others? No, we need to always listen to our brothers and sisters and be patient with them. They might just have something to say that might be of great value to us if we actually listen to them. At the very least, we should show respect to everyone, including, of course, our brothers and sisters, and, of course, to God. To back that up, let me just read to you 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17. The easy to read version says, 1 Peter 2:17, show respect for all people. Love your brothers and sisters in God's family. Respect God and honor the King. So when our brothers and sisters speak, show them respect. Be swift to hear or quick to listen. Hear them out. You might never know when they have something that we may have missed that may be valuable. Now, here's a question for you. We all want to gain knowledge, right? That's what we want to do when we communicate. Here's a question. What do we as individuals learn when we speak? When we speak, what do we learn? Nothing. Nothing. When we speak, we hope we don't say anything we don't already know or think we know. But we can often learn much when we listen to others. I'd like to interject here that those that are speaking should be respectful of others' time. In a group conversation, we should make our speech concise and to the point. We should avoid rambling on for long periods of time because this prohibits others from sharing their important messages with us and the rest of the group. So, and next, after that, when we do speak, we need to be slow to speak. It's just not about being patient and waiting to speak. When we do speak, we need to do so slowly. Something I'm struggling with right now. It's hard. It's a hard habit to break, I'll tell you. I've been struggling for years. But for one thing, if we speak too rapidly, we might be difficult to understand. People may not be able to keep up with us and fail to understand our message. It happened to me last night listening to a sermon where it was coming so fast, I couldn't keep up with it. So that doesn't work too well. If we also speak really fast, like me, we don't always pronounce our words accurately. We don't enunciate correctly. And if our words are not understood, then our communication may not be effective. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians, if you would. 1 Corinthians chapter 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 8. 14:8. If those listening to us might be hearing new material they're not familiar with, they just might not be able to keep up if we speak at a rapid pace, even if we pronounce our words properly. They may become frustrated. They may be lost and give up listening altogether. We also need to use common words and enunciate well. It's very important. If we don't, like I said, our audience may become frustrated and give up listening to what we have to say. Maybe something very important. If this happens, our communication will obviously fail, and none of us want that. Again, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 8 says, For if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself to the battle? The God's Word version says, for example, if the trumpet doesn't sound a clear call, who will get ready for battle? Now, if an Israelite sounded the trumpet to call them to battle, but he generated let's say, a weak or garbled sound, people might not understand that they were just called into battle. They might be overrun without even preparing for battle or even knowing it's coming because the message was not clear. And this, of course, could have disastrous results. So verse 9, here's some advice. So likewise you, talking to us, likewise you, except you utter by the tongue words easy to be understood, how shall it be known what is spoken? For you shall speak into the air. When we speak to others, we need to speak to them clearly, with easy to understand words, not big words nobody knows, and we need to enunciate them properly. Otherwise, Paul says, we'll just be speaking into the air. Nobody's going to understand us. Now, these are, again, technical reasons for speaking slowly, using common words and phrases and enunciating well. And using facial expressions and hand gestures can also help to convey our messages accurately. We also need to be factual and not exaggerate or be overly sensational in our speech. If we look at YouTube, for example, we'll see what many today call clickbait. The description of a video will appear to be sensational, but when we watch the content, often there's really nothing sensational about it. Turn to Matthew 12 next, if you would. That's Matthew chapter 12 and verse 36. Matthew 12, verse 36. The descriptions of many videos are not always based even on what is actually contained in the video. The title or description often makes some great claim just to get us to watch it, and then many times, as I've experienced, the video fails to even mention what the sensational title leads us to believe will be discussed. Of course, this is actually a form of deception, breaking the 9th of the 10 Commandments. We don't want to do that. And those of us who are on YouTube, should our titles or our intro exaggerate or in any way misrepresent our content? Look at Matthew 12, verse 36. This is Jesus speaking. Here he tells us, but I say to you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. The word idle here is the Greek argos, and it means, according to Strong's, useless or barren. A free online dictionary lists one of its definitions of barren as being devoid of something specified, which is exactly what we see in some of these YouTube videos. Now, if we state, well, we're going to speak on a specific topic, then we don't, then our content is barren of what we promised we would say. I suppose that might also apply to great exaggeration, or, of course, saying things that are not even true. Things that are useless or barren of the truth. Verse 37, for by your words you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. We need to be very careful about what we say. We need to be careful to consider the words we use. And we should always be deliberate and be slow to speak. Proverbs 4, verse 24 tells us in the easy-to-read version, don't bend the truth or say things that you know are not right. So thinking before we speak and speaking slowly can sometimes help prevent this. Now, often, just a simple yes or no answer to a question is all we need. Jesus says that in Matthew 5, verse 37. I'll just read that. He says, but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these comes of evil. So when we can, that's a good way to go. But occasionally our answer to someone might require more than just a simple yes or no answer. But in that case, we should always be as concise and to the point as we can. Turn over to Proverbs next, if you would. Proverbs chapter 17. That's Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 27. Proverbs 17, verse 27. Now, I know there are some that just love being the center of attention. They often seem to hog, well, if you'll excuse the expression, they often seem to hog the conversation and not allow others to speak. They don't give a person a chance to get a word in edgewise, or at least to discourage others from attempting to get a word in. But our Bible seems to favor those who remain relatively quiet. Again, Proverbs 17, verse 27. I'll be reading this in the Bible in basic English. Proverbs 17:27 says, "He who has knowledge says little, and he who has a calm spirit is a man of good sense. Even the foolish man, when he keeps quiet, is taken to be wise. When his lips are shut, he is credited with good sense." And I think this all goes back to the be swift to listen, but slow to speak. Next, James chapter 1 and verse 26. That's James chapter 1 and verse 26. If we speak excessively, we might even end up deceiving ourselves. I heard one guy, one time he got on a rant, and the more he talked, the more outrageous he got. He started making stuff up. That was awful. But, there's some that want to tell everyone else everything they believe. But sometimes they might not stop long enough to actually prove these things to themselves as they should. And that might end up passing on their deception to others. Again, James 1, verse 26. "If any man among you seem to be religious and bridles not his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is vain." To be very humble. God's word says, if a person thinks that he is religious but can't control his tongue, he's fooling himself. That person's religion is worthless. So I think we need to control our tongues. I know that we all get very excited when we come into the truth, don't we? When you came into the truth, you get excited? I think so. It's only natural. We want others to know the truly good news like we do. We're excited. And that feeling should stay with us, at least to some degree. Let's turn next to 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. Well, unfortunately today, some people are just not ready to hear the true gospel. They haven't been called yet, maybe. And if this is the case, we shouldn't harass them or condemn them, because that would only serve to push them farther and farther away and ensure they never will listen to us, even in the future. And we can always bring up the good news if we feel it might be appropriate. But remember, God's people will not go unnoticed by those around them. I don't know what your experience has been like, but I've experienced things like, why do you go to church on Saturday? Isn't Sunday the Sabbath day? Or why are you avoiding these foods? Weren't these dietary laws in the Old Testament done away with? People will ask us questions. Some because they're just curious. Some might actually listen to us. That is, if they are quick to listen and slow to speak. Unfortunately, many will be quick to tell us what they believe, but they will not take the time to actually listen to us. Have we seen that? Yeah. But when we are asked about our faith, how should we respond? What should be our manner of response? Again, 1 Peter 3, verse 15 to see here what we're told. And it tells us, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that seeks you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." Or as the easy to read version says, with gentleness and respect. We should be prepared to help others if they ask us about our hope, about what we believe, but always remember we to do so with gentleness and respect. Never beat them over the head with it. That doesn't work. Our words are very powerful. I repeat that. Our words are very powerful. They can win or lose political elections. They can help us obtain the employment we seek. And they can help us to teach others about our great Savior. Very powerful. James, if you would. James chapter 3. Back to James. James chapter 3, verse 2 this time. James chapter 3, second verse. So we know that our words can do much good, but they can also do much harm. We need to understand just how powerful our words are. They teach us that in Toastmasters, by the way. Again, James 3, verse 2. I'll be reading in the Contemporary English Version. It says, all of us do many wrong things, but if you can control your tongue, you are mature and able to control your whole body. Look, verse 3. By putting a bit into the mouth of a horse, you can turn the horse in different directions. So just by moving the bit, you can do some great things here. Verse 4. Another example. It takes strong winds to move a large sailing ship, but the captain uses only a small rudder to make it go in any direction. Our tongues are small too, yet they brag about big things. It takes only a spark to start a forest fire. Doesn't take much. Verse 6, the tongue is like a spark. It is an evil power that dirties the rest of the body and sets a person's entire life on fire with flames that come from hell itself. The word hell here, by the way, is the Greek word Gehenna, meaning the lake of fire. You know, sometimes even the smallest things we say can erupt into something huge. I think we see that on social media all the time, don't we? Yeah, things go ballistic. Verse 7. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures can be tamed and have been tamed. But our tongues get out of control. They are restless and evil and always spreading deadly poison. So we need to be carefully considering the words that come out of our mouths. Not just how we pronounce the words or how fast we speak, but even more importantly, what we say. While we need to speak or otherwise communicate in a clear, slow, and easy to understand manner, the most important part of our communication is the content. The actual delivery of the message is important, but nowhere near as important as the content of our messages, the meaning of our words. You know, many of us, certainly myself included, may not be the best speakers when it comes to an elegant, technical delivery of our message. But that shouldn't stop us if our content is of value, and we always remember to speak with gentleness and respect. Turn over to Exodus, if you would, or turn back to Exodus chapter 4. Exodus chapter 4. We'll go to verse 10. Exodus 4, verse 10. Now here God was sending Moses to speak to the Pharaoh, to tell him to let his people go. Now, how many of us would have turned God down at the burning bush? Will we have done that? Think about that. I won't ask you for an answer, but that was quite a task. And while that was quite an opportunity to serve God, Moses wasn't quite sure he was up to it. And one of the reasons was because Moses was not a good speaker. But if God calls us to do something for him, will he let us fail? No. I think if we fail, it would be on us. God won't let us down. But nevertheless, Moses was at least a little apprehensive about this. Again, Exodus 4, verse 10, Contemporary English Version. Moses answered God here. Moses replied, I have never been a good speaker. I wasn't one before you spoke to me, and I'm not one now. I am slow at speaking, meaning he's not very good at speaking, and I can never think of what to say. How many of us might say that? Verse 12. Skip to verse 12. God says, "Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth, and teach you what you shall say." Now Moses obeyed God here. He took the opportunity to serve God with his calling, and we can too. Although to be fair, God did have Aaron speak for Moses at times. But at any rate, Moses did, for the most part, fulfill the task that God gave him to do. Turn to 1 Corinthians 2, verse 1, if you would. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 1. So what I'm trying to say here, I think, is we need to do the best we can in a technical sense, but that shouldn't stop us or slow us down as long as we do the best we can. So, 1 Corinthians, chapter 2, we'll begin in verse 1. Now, Moses wasn't the only one that felt he was lacking in the speech department. It looks like the Apostle Paul seemed to feel the same way. Again, 1 Corinthians 2, verse 1. Here he says, "And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech or wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. For determined not to know anything among you, save Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling." So in 2 Peter 3, verse 16, it seems that Paul admits he may be difficult to understand. He's not a great speaker, maybe. Think so? 1 Corinthians 2, I'm sorry. You're right, 1 Corinthians 2. I'll get these verses right one of these days. You learn to speak better, huh? Okay, the Apostle Paul, though, says he didn't excel in his speech. But look at the profound impact that he had. What if he or Moses would say, "Look, I'm not a speaker. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to talk to the Pharaoh, or I'm not going to write any epistles, or, think about that." So I'm trying to say that while we can improve our communication in a technical sense, the main thing is the impact we have with what we do say. Now, some of us may say, "Well, I'm worried about that. I'm worried I won't say the right thing. Or maybe I'm in a real spot, under pressure somewhere, maybe in a church or something else." Well, there are some cases where we don't even need to worry about speaking. Hold your place here, if you would. We'll be ending shortly with verses 4 and 5. We'll come right back to them. So hold your place here, if you would. That is 1 Corinthians 2, 4 and 5 we'll come back to. So anyway, and let's turn over to, let's see where we're going here, Luke 21, verse 13. That is Luke chapter 21 and verse 13. Christ promises us that when times are really rough, he will give us the words to say. And we should always pray and ask for wisdom as to how and what we're to speak. But here we'll see that in the future, when our enemies may question us, when times are really tough for true Christians, what will Christ do? Again, Luke 21, verse 13. Words of Christ. "They shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts not to meditate before you shall answer. For that's Christ. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist." And so when things get tough, if we're afraid to speak, Christ says he will speak with us, through us, by us. Christ promises that he will give us the words to say when we're persecuted and questioned by our enemies. And then, as always, we should be slow to speak, allowing Christ to speak through us and not forging ahead ourselves necessarily. So, okay. To conclude, communication is very important, especially today, but it always has been. We can communicate more effectively when we speak clearly and slowly, in words that are easily understood. Otherwise, Paul tells us that we'll be just speaking into the air. No one will understand. We probably should double check our electronic communications before we send them. We saw that doesn't always work if we don't. Once we put something out there, it's out there and people see it. We also need to be very honest in our communication. We should never trick someone into listening to us by deceiving them as to what we're actually going to say. We should never exaggerate or stretch the truth. And if we slowly and carefully consider our words, we're better able to avoid exaggeration or even possibly deceit in our speech. And when we can, Jesus tells us to keep it simple. Just keep our yes, yes, and our no, no. And if the answer requires more than that, we should be short and to the point. We read in Proverbs earlier that he who has knowledge says little, and he who has a calm spirit is a man of good sense. And very importantly, we really need to pay attention to the words we say. Jesus tells us in Matthew 12, verse 37, remember, for by your word you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. So to speak effectively, we first need to listen. We need to be swift to hear and slow to speak. We need to listen to others. We need to hear them out. We need to respect them and their thoughts, even if we disagree with them. We also need to keep our anger in check, as we read. If we end up not agreeing with someone, we should never become angry with them. No, we should always love and respect each other. You know, one of the things that makes us happy, or at least it should, is to share the gospel with others. But not everyone is ready for the truth today. We need to be discerning and determining how best to interact with those who are not yet familiar with God's true ways. We always need to speak truth, but always with gentleness and respect. We should avoid unnecessarily offending others whenever possible. James reminds us that our tongues, although small, can be like a spark that starts a forest fire. Again, we've all witnessed this on social media, I'm sure, and maybe for other places too, right? We should all strive to speak well from a technical standpoint whenever we can. However, people like Moses and the Apostle Paul didn't consider themselves good speakers. Yet, both spoke effectively for God. Both stepped into the role, the opportunity that God gave them, even though they didn't think they were perfect, and nobody is. And we, brethren, should do the same. We should accept whatever role or task that God's given to us. And remember, there may be times when Christ will speak directly through us. At that point, we won't even have to worry about what we have to say. I hope we held our place back in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. So we'll read verses 4 and 5. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 4 and 5 to end today. When we do communicate with others, we should always be quick to listen and slow to speak. And when we do speak, it should be with gentleness and respect. Beyond that, Paul has some additional advice for us. Again, 1 Corinthians 2, verses 4 and 5 to end today. Here's what he tells us. He says, "And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God."